Anyway, it's time to start another project, and today we're going to finish up a bench, and I'm finally going to get rid of this shirt. So let's get into this. Here's the bench, and it's just getting tired. Stain sealer is starting to come off. Not so much on the top parts, but definitely the flat parts that end up seeing the sun. So we're going to take this apart and get it all stained. So I've got my bench turned upside down, and it's on top of a piece of carpet I like to work on. And that's so when I drop anything, I don't lose the screws or pieces into the grass. And I'm going to start by just taking all the wood off that creates the seat of the bench and not the back. And that's a magnetized tray I'm putting some of these screws in. So I'm going to use a permanent marker and number all these boards so that way I can put them back in the same order. And I'm going to do that because I want to have all my screw holes line up for that metal bracket I took off. Now I'll use my impact driver and a 10mm socket to take the nuts off of these carriage bolts, and that should release the wood from the cast iron side of the bench. With the first side done, I'll move on to the second side. I'll remove all the wood from the seat and get the sander out so I can start prepping them for stain. I will sand all sides of these boards first with 80 grit and then with 150 grit sandpaper. All these boards look like they had plenty of life left in them. So after I sanded them, I took the permanent marker and numbered them again. I'm going to use my Valspar semi-transparent one coat exterior stain and sealer. I'll shake it up really good and then put it in a smaller container so I can brush it on the boards. I like using a paintbrush, and I will make sure that I really saturate these boards with a stain sealer. And it's a little bit messy, and I could probably wear some gloves, but this particular stain sealer is a water cleanup, so I'm not really worried about getting the stain sealer on me. The bottoms of these boards will have some marks on them because of the way I'm drying them, but since these are part of the bench and they'll be facing towards the ground, you'll never see them. I should be able to handle these boards in about 3 hours, and they should be completely dry in about 6. Now that the wood for the seat is drying, I can focus my attention back on the cast iron end pieces. I'll use a hose and a scrub brush and try to get as much algae and dirt and debris off of these cast iron end pieces. Even though I'm doing a good job scrubbing everything down with this nylon bristle brush, I'll still have to go back with a wire wheel and do some touch up on these cast iron ends. So I'm going to do the bottom and once and put it all back together, and then the top. So that way I've always got something holding it together and keeping it in shape. It didn't take long in the sun for this to dry, and now that I'm going back and checking for rust, you can see how some spots are in pretty bad shape. So I'll take a wire wheel attached to my drill and go over all the metal pieces, making sure that I knock off any loose rust and get it back down to bare metal. So if you have an old rusted out bench that you're trying to bring back to life, just hit it with the wire wheel and keep at it. You'll be surprised how quick that cast iron cleans up and how good it looks once it's painted. This bench has a large cast iron backrest, and I'm going to go ahead and take the wire wheel to it. It's got at least 3 layers of paint on it. I painted it black, and then at one point I came back with some copper to highlight it, and then chose to paint it green. The green paint comes off really easy because that was a latex paint, not an oil-based paint. Make sure to go over all the metal you can reach with the wire wheel, even the parts you can't see, like the back of the bench. I'm going to go ahead and remove these 2 pieces of wood so I can paint as much of the cast iron as possible. And I'll use my permanent marker and label these so I know to get them back in the same spot I removed them from. Again, I'm going to get a rag with some mineral spirits and wipe this all down really good. I didn't catch it on camera, but when I blew myself off with the leaf blower, I also blew all the dust off from the bench. So I'm really using the mineral spirits to try to clean off any oil that might have been on the metal. My wife got a good kick out of me choosing this John Deere green color as my paint, but it is a good outdoor paint. And I'm just going to use a cheap disposable brush to brush it on. And try not to knock over your paint can when you're moving around too. I'm really glad I got this carpet here. I'm even gladder that I blew everything off with the leaf blower so that I could do this and get as much of this paint back into this can as possible. So once I get done painting the green, I'll throw this paintbrush away, and then I'll move around to the back with that rag and some mineral spirits and wipe off any runs that I might have. So just like before, a quick wipe down with the mineral spirits. And then this time I'm going to use the Rust-Oleum oil-based gloss black paint. And I'll apply that paint with a 2-inch disposable paintbrush. I really had to take my time on the back when I was painting the black because I didn't want to have the paint run across the green that was on the other side. And I finished painting the cast iron black on the other end. Well, I don't know if you can hear that, but it's starting to rain. The only downside with oil-based paint is it takes a long time to dry. So we are done for today. We'll have to pick this up tomorrow when everything's nice and dry. I'm just going over everything before I put it back together, and you can see these lag bolts are brass, so they don't corrode, but they're also not magnetic. So I ended up losing one. So I found a stainless steel one, and I am going to use it to replace. And some of my washers are getting pretty corroded, so I was going to see if I had any more washers. Let's see what we got here. Well, once I dug through all my washers and found the ones that I could use as replacements, I got back out to the bench to put it together. So if you're replacing the wood, you have to drill holes for the carriage bolts, but don't drill recessed holes so that they sit below the top of the surface of the wood. If you do, water is going to collect in that recessed area and it's going to cause the wood to rot. And that's something you don't want to happen. Not all cast iron benches have the metal bracket that helps support the end pieces, but if you are replacing the wood on your bench, make sure you choose a good piece of wood for this one because it's going to end up getting a lot more stress put on it. Now I'll move to the other side and do the same thing by securing the wood to the bench with carriage bolts. You'll want to make sure all the wood is on the bench before you tighten down the nuts. And if you're using a power tool like an impact wrench, be careful not to over tighten them. Well, we've got the bottom half of the bench done. Now we just need to do the backrest. But we've got a good start on that because we've already done a lot of work on the metal. I'll use my drill and take out these screws, but I'll need to be careful when I get down to the last couple. This cast iron piece weighs a lot more than you think, and you wouldn't want it falling on you. There was no rust on this piece, so I didn't use my wire wheel to clean it up. I just used mineral spirits and a rag to wipe off all the pollen and mildew. What does look like rust is where I have painted it copper in the past, and that copper paint is showing through. I will wipe down the backside before I start painting the back black, and I will do the backside first. So I stirred up the black paint before I started painting, and I'm using another 2-inch disposable brush. And I prefer to use disposable brushes instead of cleaning them when I'm using a oil-based paint. so I go through a lot of disposable paintbrushes. I'll try to get this flipped over so I can paint the front side without making too much of a mess. I'll support it with some plastic corners that are actually left over from packing material from some shelves that I bought. And I'll paint all the other areas along the edge so that the whole thing has a fresh coat of paint. The only places I really have to be careful is where the green and the black paint meets each other along the outside edge. So I am really close to being done with this black paint. I've got this one metal piece that went along the bottom, and then I've got to do some touch up on each end where I couldn't reach when the back was still on the bench. I'm even going to put a little bit of fresh paint on the very bottoms. I'll put a little bit of paint on the mounting hardware. I don't think it's required since it's all stainless steel and brass, but that finishes the painting. I'm a little bit of a perfectionist, so I ended up taking a small paintbrush and going back and touching up the green paint wherever it hit the black. But it's probably not a required thing for a bench that's going to be outside. A lot of this is repetitive. I'll take these pieces of wood from the top part of the bench and I'll sand them with 80 grit and then 150 grit, and then I'll go ahead and put a coat of stain sealer on them. After putting a screw in these pieces, I hung them from an electrical wire in the barn. That way I can paint all the sides at the same time, because unlike the bottom of the bench, you'll be able to see all sides of these pieces of wood. The screws I'm using to hang these pieces is awful long, and that means I can use it as a handle to make it easier to stain these. Okay, that's it for today. Everything's been stained, sealed, or painted. So we'll put it together tomorrow and see how it looks. I intentionally have not screwed these in, so there's a little bit of flexibility with the legs. We want the screw holes pointing up because the back's going to screw into it. Like the bottom boards, I will hand tighten these nuts until I have that cast iron centerpiece of the back screwed in place. It's not required to hold your pinky up in the air when you screw these nuts on. I'll go ahead and screw in this piece of metal that stiffens up the seat, because the bench gets a lot heavier with that cast iron back on and it makes it harder to move it around. I will line things up so that I'm using the original screw holes, and these are stainless steel screws. So if you buy new screws for your bench, make sure they're not too long so that they don't poke through the other side. Since I've already got the two wooden boards in that support the back of the bench, I'm going to go ahead and screw in these two side supports, and the screw will go into the same holes as before. The cast iron back of the bench will go into place, and I will screw those in with stainless steel screws. I will get all the screws in and started before I go back and tighten them all down. And now that this last screw is all the way tightened up, we can stand the bench up and get the last two little boards in. Here you can make out the word left that I wrote in permanent magic marker. The word left is pointed towards the ground, so you'll never see it. And then we still have the other side to do. I cleaned the nameplate with some Scotch-Brite and then put it in place with the two brass screws. Well, there it is. It is finished. I spent about 3 hours each day for 2 days, and then a little bit the last day putting it together. But it turned out really nice and makes my wife's garden look a lot better. And just for fun, here's 2 photos from the past. This is our wedding reception at the house, and the bench is in the foreground. And here I am about to give Daisy, our dog, the leftover hand bone from Thanksgiving. And the bench is right there behind me. I replaced the wood once, and this is the 3rd time I've refinished it. Well, there's another project done. A bench. Hopefully it'll last another 5 or 10 years before I have to replace any wood. Thanks for watching. Like, subscribe, check out those playlists, and I'll see you in that next video.